I was promised the promotion until I realized my CEO was sleeping with the person who got it. I remember the day I was told the promotion was mine because my boss didn't actually say it directly. He didn't need to. In corporate spaces, certainty arrives in fragments. A longer handshake, a nod during meetings, a sentence that begins with when you step into the new role instead of if. I noticed all of it. I earned all of it. I worked late when others logged off. I carried projects that weren't assigned to me. I fixed mistakes that didn't have my name on them. I learned how to speak carefully but confidently in rooms where decisions were already leaning my way. I believed performance mattered because that's what they teach ambitious girls who want to survive corporate towers built by men who never explain the rules out loud. The role was senior, visible, powerful. It meant influence and financial freedom. And finally, not having to prove myself twice as hard for half the credit. My reviews were flawless, my numbers undeniable. Even HR smiled differently when they spoke to me. Then the announcement meeting was scheduled. I walked in prepared to hear my name, and instead I heard hers. Soft-spoken, less experienced, always nearby. Someone who arrived late and left early, yet somehow remained close to the executive floor. Applause filled the room while my thoughts went silent. I smiled because shock is not allowed in professional spaces. I congratulated her because bitterness ruins reputations faster than incompetence. My boss avoided my eyes. That was the first crack. Later, he told me the decision was complicated, that leadership needed alignment, that timing mattered, that my growth was important to the company. Corporate language for you are not chosen. Something felt off, but I couldn't name it yet, until patterns started revealing themselves. Late-night meetings that ran too long, closed doors, glances exchanged when I entered unexpectedly, her calendar syncing perfectly with his. I wasn't paranoid. I was observant. The truth didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly during a work trip when I saw them together in a hotel lobby, pretending not to know each other. That moment changed everything. I realized my promotion wasn't lost. It was traded. Would you confront your boss immediately or wait for proof? I didn't confront anyone after that hotel lobby moment because shock needs time to settle before it turns into clarity. I walked past them like I hadn't seen a thing. My heels steady my face, calm, my mind screaming. They laughed softly together, unaware that the illusion they worked so hard to maintain had cracked open in plain sight. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying every interaction I had dismissed before. Her sudden confidence in meetings, his patience with her mistakes, the way she spoke with authority she hadn't earned yet never questioned. It all lined up too neatly to ignore. The next morning at the conference, I watched them separately. He praised her presentation even though it recycled ideas from my own proposal. She smiled modestly, pretending discomfort with attention while soaking it in. When our eyes met, there was a flicker of something unreadable guilt, maybe fear, maybe triumph. I realized then how naive I had been, thinking ambition was enough. Talent can open doors, but intimacy decides who walks through them. And I had been playing by rules no one had ever promised were fair. Back at the office, whispers followed the promotion announcement, but never crossed into accusation. Corporate betrayal thrives in silence. Everyone senses it, yet no one names it. Too much to lose. Too many eyes watching. My boss scheduled a one-on-one with me days later. He praised my professionalism, thanked me for handling the situation gracefully, and assured me my time would come. I nodded, while noting how carefully he avoided specifics. His words sounded rehearsed like damage control, not mentorship. I wanted to scream that I knew, that I wasn't stupid, that my work didn't suddenly lose value overnight. But power doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to leverage. And I didn't have mine yet. Instead, I observed. I documented. I listened. I noticed how HR stopped copying me on emails, how decisions happened without my input, how my projects slowly shifted into her hands. That was when I understood the real betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the lie that merit mattered. I stopped seeing the office as a place of growth and started seeing it as a game board. And I was done being a pawn. Would you start planning your exit or your revenge? I didn't choose revenge or resignation right away because both felt reactive, and I needed control, not emotion. I showed up every day composed, efficient, unreadable. Inside, I was mapping power lines. Who reported to whom? Who approved budgets? Who knew what? And who pretended not to? Corporate betrayal isn't loud. It hides in policy meetings and private calendars. I noticed how her access expanded overnight. She sat in meetings she once observed silently, now speaking as if she belonged there. He backed her without hesitation. When she stumbled, he reframed it as vision. When others questioned her readiness, he shut them down gently. That gentleness wasn't kindness, it was protection. I started hearing things unintentionally. Assistants talk, vendors notice, people assume silence means ignorance. I learned that the affair wasn't new. It had been hidden carefully long before the promotion cycle began. The role wasn't a reward, it was insurance. Knowing that shifted something in me. I stopped feeling personally replaced and started seeing the machinery at work. Power doesn't promote innocence, it promotes loyalty. And hers was bought privately. One evening, I stayed late pretending to finish a report while listening to voices in his office. The door wasn't fully closed. I heard her laugh softly then, his voice dropped lower. I didn't need explicit words. Context said enough. I walked out calm. There is a moment when hurt turns into focus. That was mine. I began documenting everything methodically. Calendar overlaps, policy violations, budget approvals that skipped procedure. Nothing dramatic, just patterns. Corporate scandals aren't exposed by passion. They are exposed by precision. Meanwhile, he praised my resilience publicly, called me a team player. I realized he wanted me quiet. Gratitude is often used as a leash. She avoided me now, not out of guilt but caution. She knew I knew something even if she didn't know how much. Her confidence came with cracks. I wasn't planning to destroy them. I was planning to protect myself. But sometimes protection requires truth to surface, whether you intend it or not. The game had started, and this time I was paying attention. Would you gather evidence quietly or walk away with dignity? What surprised me most was how normal everything looked on the surface. Emails went out, meetings continued, deadlines were met, and smiles stayed polite. Corporate betrayal doesn't disrupt workflow, it sharpens it. Everyone moves carefully when power is involved. I started noticing who avoided me and who suddenly became overly friendly. Silence became informative. So did nervous compliments. People sensed something, but no one wanted to be the first to say it aloud. Careers survive by pretending not to notice inconvenient truths. She began mimicking my leadership style. My phrasing appeared in her presentations. My ideas resurfaced under her name, refined just enough to look original. He praised her innovation openly. I sat there, calm, hands folded, reminding myself that imitation is not victory. Exposure would come eventually, but only if I stayed disciplined. One afternoon, HR asked me to mentor a junior hire. The request sounded flattering until I realized it pulled me away from strategic projects. Soft sidelining disguised as opportunity. I accepted anyway. Resistance would mark me as difficult, and that label travels fast. Meanwhile, he became distant with me professionally. Less feedback, fewer meetings. He stopped asking my opinion. That silence confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer an asset. I was a liability who knew too much. I kept my documentation meticulous. Dates, times, approvals, conversations. I didn't record emotions, only facts. Power dismisses feelings, but it cannot ignore evidence. Then something unexpected happened. A compliance review was announced, company-wide routine on paper, sudden in timing. I watched his confidence shift just slightly. Her smile tightened. The room felt different. I realized then that secrets don't age well in corporate environments. They multiply risk, and risk attracts audits. I was careful not to appear eager. I answered questions neutrally, provided information when asked, never volunteered more than necessary. I wasn't playing hero. I was surviving. One evening, she approached me quietly, asking if we could talk. Her tone wasn't hostile, it was cautious. She asked how I was handling everything. I smiled politely and said I was focused on my work. Her relief was visible. She believed silence meant surrender. That misunderstanding was her mistake. I didn't need to expose them directly. Systems expose what people hide when pressure builds. All I had to do was stay accurate. I left the office that night knowing something was shifting. Power hates uncertainty, and secrets create it. For the first time since the promotion announcement, I slept without replaying conversations. Control doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from preparation. Would you trust the system to reveal the truth or take control yourself? Weeks passed, and the office rhythm changed subtly. People who once flattered her now hesitated. Meetings that once gave her unchecked space now included me in ways that made her pause. I realized influence is fragile when built on secrets and not performance. I focused on my work harder than ever, not out of ambition, but as a shield. Accuracy, presence, consistency. Each report flawless, each deadline met, each interaction professional. I let my competence speak, while gossip whispered around the corners of the office. She noticed. The tension was small but sharp. A smile that didn't reach her eyes, a nod delayed, a question she phrased too carefully. She tried to regain ground subtly by pointing out minor errors, steering discussions toward me, inserting herself wherever she could. But I had learned to navigate the space she wanted to control without confrontation. He began scheduling private meetings less frequently. I understood why. The gap between appearances and reality was narrowing, and it made control uncomfortable. He had invested in loyalty rather than skill, and now the weight of that choice pressed quietly. I started talking with colleagues privately, casually, letting small truths surface naturally without accusation. Mentions of past mistakes, hints at favoritism, discrepancies in project ownership. People began connecting dots themselves. No one wanted to start a war, but everyone noticed the shift. The junior hire I had been mentoring grew under my guidance quickly. Recognition trickled upward naturally. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. She couldn't claim my achievements without looking foolish. Influence built on manipulation cannot withstand visibility. One afternoon, she confronted me in the break room, her voice low, pretending casual concern. Are you coping with everything okay? I smiled softly, replied calmly, I'm focused on work. She froze. That pause told me all I needed to know. She had assumed silence meant fear or resignation. It didn't. It meant strategy. I began documenting patterns with renewed precision. Her schedules, his approvals, my contributions. Evidence was no longer for confrontation. It was armor. When the system eventually acted, it would be irrefutable. The subtle victories started piling up. People began asking me for advice, including on projects she claimed as her own. When she tried to redirect credit, others noticed the discrepancy. Her control slipped in small increments that seemed insignificant but carried impact. For the first time, I felt a quiet power. Not the kind that humiliates, but the kind that protects. Power that does not rely on lies. I understood something important. Revenge is satisfying only when you first reclaimed yourself. I left the office that night with a calm I hadn't felt since the hotel lobby. Observing, documenting, performing, not reacting, had transformed fear into focus. The game was far from over, but for the first time, I knew I had an edge. Would you continue exposing manipulation subtly or confront it openly? By now, I had learned to move through the office like a shadow that everyone noticed but couldn't touch. I spoke when necessary, smiled when appropriate, and kept my eyes open. Observation became my weapon. Each small interaction revealed a new layer of their scheme. She tried subtle intimidation, correcting my suggestions in meetings, asking questions with thinly veiled criticism, leaning on shared gossip to cast doubt on my competence. I nodded politely, made no mistakes, and let her perform her act while silently cataloging every detail. He, on the other hand, became distant but cautious. I could sense the tension behind his compliments. He realized I knew. The hotel lobby scene had changed the power dynamic, even if no one admitted it aloud. He started measuring every word, every gesture. That hesitation, that subtle faltering, was proof that the control he thought he had was slipping. I also noticed the collateral impact. Colleagues began questioning her sudden rise, noticing gaps in her expertise, comparing her work to mine. Small doubts planted quietly, without accusation, began to erode her facade. The office, once her stage, was becoming neutral ground. Then came the crucial turning point. A critical project she was leading began showing cracks. Deadlines were missed, approvals delayed, communication sloppy. He tried to shield her, but the evidence was mounting too fast. Her smile, once confident, now twitched at corners, faltered under scrutiny. I stayed neutral publicly, continued my flawless work, and positioned myself as the reliable constant. Influence doesn't require confrontation. It's maintained through consistency, competence, and calm. Every error she made became more visible because of the contrast I provided. Meanwhile, whispers reached me indirectly. Colleagues seeking guidance, subtle questions about past promotions, quiet curiosity about my perspective. I answered minimally, professionally, letting others piece together the story themselves. The truth often needs no announcement. It just needs visibility. By the time I walked out of the office each night, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known for months. Power had shifted quietly, not through rage or exposure, but through precision and patience. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I was reclaiming my space, my voice, and my agency. I realized then the most important lesson. Corporate betrayal may hide in secrecy, favors, and hidden relationships, but it cannot survive transparency, competence, and unwavering focus. The stronger your foundation, the less impact lies have. For the first time since losing that promotion, I slept with clarity, knowing that momentum had subtly shifted. The game wasn't over, but I was no longer the one being played. Would you keep your strategy quiet or start using influence to regain control immediately? Months passed and the subtle power shift became undeniable. I no longer felt the sting of exclusion as sharply because I had learned to anticipate it and prepare. Meetings no longer caught me off guard. Her corrections, once meant to intimidate, now seemed rehearsed and hollow. People began noticing the difference in our performance, and the office's perception started to shift without me lifting a finger. He, the CEO, began avoiding one-on-one interactions. His carefully constructed barrier around her was cracking under scrutiny, and he didn't know how to handle it. The tension was visible in minor gestures, a pause before approval, a delayed response to requests, a slight hesitation when praising her. Every subtle misstep gave me insight into the fragile foundation of their arrangement. Meanwhile, I began using small moments to rebuild my influence. I offered mentorship casually, contributed to strategic discussions, and shared insights without drawing attention to myself. Others started seeking my input naturally, recognizing competence over favoritism. My reputation, quietly tarnished, was slowly restoring itself. She noticed. Her smiles became tighter, her questions more pointed, her attempts to mimic me less subtle. There were flashes of frustration when a project succeeded under my guidance, moments when she tried to reclaim her hold over the room but failed. The contrast between us was becoming painfully clear. The most telling moment came during a board presentation. She was leading, speaking confidently, until I added an insight subtly, a detail only I would know, a piece of strategy she had overlooked. Eyes shifted. Board members nodded toward me. Her confidence faltered for the briefest second, enough to expose her insecurity. The gap between appearance and reality widened. I began documenting these shifts, not for exposure, but for my own clarity and security. Notes on approvals, mistakes, meetings, subtle interactions. Everything lined up to show the truth. Merit matters more than manipulation in the long run. The system, though slow, responds to consistent performance. I realized the true betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the lie that merit alone could secure advancement. Ambition was not enough in a system fueled by hidden agendas and personal favors. But now, observation and strategic patience were my allies, and they were far stronger weapons than anger or confrontation. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was quietly reclaiming authority. Every interaction reinforced that I was competent, steady, and dependable, the antithesis of the favoritism she relied on. My colleagues' trust returned organically as they recognized consistency over appearances. By the end of the day, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. I understood finally that power isn't always about being the loudest or the first. Sometimes it's about being steady, patient, and prepared. And when secrets unravel, strength built on truth will always outlast deception. Would you let your work speak for you or confront manipulation directly in the workplace? The months that followed felt like walking through a chessboard where every piece moved exactly as I intended. I had learned to anticipate her tactics, to predict his reactions, to navigate the unspoken rules of corporate betrayal without losing composure. The office was no longer a battlefield of fear. It was a space of calculated observation. She tried subtle sabotage occasionally, a misdirected email, a minor misrepresentation in meetings, or casual hints meant to undermine me. Each time I stayed neutral, collected evidence, and let the inconsistency speak for itself. Every attempt only highlighted her reliance on manipulation rather than skill. He grew quieter in public, more reserved in his praise, less inclined to intervene when her errors were visible. The system had begun responding to competence instead of clandestine loyalty. It was a slow, almost imperceptible shift, but it was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Colleagues began consulting me naturally. Small questions about project strategy, guidance on client communication, feedback on proposals. These weren't public endorsements. They were private acknowledgments that my reliability mattered more than favoritism. Influence had returned, subtly, steadily. I began mentoring others more openly, guiding them with precision and care. The junior hire I'd supported earlier now excelled and received recognition, further demonstrating that performance, nurtured thoughtfully, outweighed secret alliances. My credibility quietly multiplied while her facade started showing cracks. One afternoon, she approached me privately, her tone cautious, almost pleading. "Are you okay with everything happening? she asked, pretending concern. I smiled calmly and replied, I'm focused on my work. That small answer carried weight she couldn't counteract. She had assumed my silence meant defeat, but it signaled nothing of the sort. I realized then that true power doesn't need confrontation. It requires consistency, observation, and a quiet refusal to participate in the deceit. The office gossip, the whispers, the half-truths, all of it lost impact because I had built an unshakable foundation, rooted in competence and poise. Even he began to notice. The subtle changes in her demeanor, the missed steps, the reliance on improvisation rather than preparation, it all exposed the fragility of his investment in secrecy. Control, once comfortable, was slipping quietly from their hands. By the time I left that evening, I felt a calm sense of victory. Not the kind that humiliates, but the kind that protects and restores. Power had shifted subtly, naturally, without drama, without exposure, just through the quiet force of patience and accuracy. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The game was still ongoing, but I was no longer the one being played. Would you maintain patience to regain influence, or take immediate action to expose the betrayal? By this point, I'd begun to see the bigger picture. The promotion, the whispers, the subtle favoritism. It wasn't personal. It was business, ambition, and secrecy. She wasn't talented enough to deserve the role, and he wasn't honest enough to admit the truth. Their affair had rewritten the rules, and for months, I had been navigating a maze of invisible barriers. I watched her struggle silently. Her confidence, once effortless, now flickered. Every small mistake, every oversight became more visible. She tried to claim credit, deflect responsibility, but the foundation was shaky. Her charm, once a shield, now felt fragile under observation. Meanwhile, I built influence quietly. I led projects meticulously, offered guidance, delivered results. Colleagues noticed without me needing to boast. The contrast between our approaches became undeniable. Competence overshadowed favoritism, subtly but unmistakably. He began to hesitate around me. The assurance in his gestures, the ease in his tone, all slightly faltered when I entered a room. I realized that the power he thought he controlled was shifting, and he sensed it. That realization alone gave me confidence I hadn't felt in months. I started to document every detail, not for confrontation, but for clarity and protection. Emails, meetings, approvals, casual comments, everything mapped into a web that made the truth undeniable. Knowledge became armor, observation became leverage. I didn't need to strike, I just needed to remain steady. The junior hire I had mentored flourished under my guidance. Recognition reached me indirectly, as colleagues began acknowledging the accuracy and insight I had provided all along. Her influence dwindled as mine resurfaced quietly. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. One day, she approached me cautiously again, this time with a hint of fear behind her practiced smile. Are you okay? She asked softly. I smiled calmly and replied, I'm focused on results. That small answer spoke volumes. Silence had become my ally, composure my shield. She had assumed defeat, but I had been planning strategy. I understood finally that the real betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the illusion of meritocracy in a corporate system fueled by hidden relationships. Ambition alone wasn't enough. Observation, precision, and patience were required. I had learned those lessons the hard way. By the end of the day, I felt a calm sense of power, not the kind that seeks to humiliate, but the kind that restores balance. Corporate betrayal may be hidden in shadows, but truth, when nurtured quietly, always surfaces. Would you expose manipulation openly or continue reclaiming your influence quietly? The final realization came quietly, without fanfare. The office that had once felt like a battlefield now felt like familiar terrain. I wasn't the target anymore. I had reclaimed my voice, my credibility, and my confidence. The promotion may have been stolen, but my reputation, carefully nurtured and protected, had returned stronger than ever. She no longer dared to undermine me openly. Every subtle attempt at intimidation or misdirection faltered under scrutiny. Colleagues observed, noticed, and naturally gravitated toward reliability over favoritism. My influence had shifted from quiet observation to undeniable presence. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was asserting truth. He remained cautious, measuring words and gestures, aware that I knew too much to be easily controlled. His investment in secrecy and favoritism could not withstand the steady exposure of competence and patience. Power, after all, cannot survive the subtle force of precision over time. I mentored more openly, guided projects, and led initiatives that highlighted my skill without needing to compete directly with her. Her role, once amplified by secrecy, diminished under the light of performance and transparency. The office began to value results over appearances, naturally realigning influence without dramatic confrontation. Reflection taught me that the betrayal was never about me. It was about ambition and control. Corporate systems, even those built on rules, are human and flawed. Loyalties shift, and favoritism can mask incompetence for only so long. Observing carefully, documenting patiently, and acting strategically becomes the real path to power. I no longer needed the promotion to validate myself. I had learned that merit is important, but composure, patience, and consistency are stronger currencies in the corporate world. I walked into rooms confident, my presence undeniable, my authority unshakable. Not because of favoritism or schemes, but because I had reclaimed control over my narrative. The affair that once seemed catastrophic now appeared as a lesson disguised in betrayal. It revealed the mechanics of ambition, the fragility of influence built on secrecy, and the quiet strength of persistence. I had survived the storm, not by confrontation, but by awareness, strategy, and unwavering professionalism. I don't hate them. I don't need revenge. I have clarity, I have dignity, and I have the understanding that true power comes from mastering yourself first. When secrets crumble, when lies are exposed by consistency, when observation meets action, the system finally balances itself. If this story leaves one lesson, it is this. Corporate betrayal is subtle, ambition is ruthless, and the truth can be quiet, yet unstoppable. Protect your reputation, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of patience. Would you prioritize integrity over promotion or play along to survive in a world of hidden agendas?